I welcome you again to today's presentation, which I am dedicating to the flowers of Vojnich's manuscript and their architectural rendering in sacred buildings. And this applies not only to old temples, but this element is actually still used today. The emphasis is especially on the strange tubes, which are very likely part of the flowers. But let's not get ahead of ourselves and let's look at the architecture of ancient Indian temples. India, like Egypt, is a rich source in the spiritual sense of the word. In essence, we can say that what the architecture and frescoes of ancient India express, the architecture of ancient Egypt, Muslim architecture and also the architecture of other religions also express. It's a little different with Christian buildings, and that will also be the subject of another video because it has to do with the shape of our earth. Let's look at the first flower in a Hindu temple. We look at the ceiling vault and see in detail what the tube in the flower represents. You can see it in the middle and it is graduated just like in the illustrations of Vojnich's manuscript. Other smaller flowers are placed in a circle around the center. Women stand in pairs around the inner flower, and you can definitely recognize them by their figures. These women have rings in their ears as a symbol of fertility. We had the opportunity to see the same circle in the illustration in Vojnich's manuscript, where one of the women is holding it. A similar circle can also be found with the goddess Inanna, or Ishtar. Another circle carries, for example, the Egyptian Horus. Notice the lighting hanging from the center. Similar is the case in other Indian temples as well. Let's compare this element with the illustrations in Vojnich's manuscript. They are these strange tubes, some with a tip and some without. But they are the parts that emerge from the center of the flower. You can see they are stepped. The question is whether these flowers actually grow from top to bottom. But let's see how it would look in the illustration if we flip it. Here again, for illustration, we have energy particles, which we call orbs, and they are the illustrated women that come out of the flowers. Let's look at the building element of an Indian temple in the shape of a flower. This one is slightly different from the previous one in terms of decoration. The center is quite difficult to see because it is photographed directly from below. The flowers around the center are perched on stars, and the stars are made up of two squares turned 45 degrees to each other. Let's return for a moment to the illustration of Vojnich's manuscript. You see concentric circles with women on them. Women represent the energy orbs that emanate from the flower tubes. Every woman carries a star. The same as we saw in the Hindu temple. The star represents star fire, or light. This means that these energetic particles take their energy from the stars. An interesting feature of this flower are the arches that line the center. They are organized like a cone pattern, as we saw in the illustrations in Vojnich's manuscript for some flowers. Here is one example. This flower appears to be closed, with only something sticking out of its top. It has a typical cone shape. The strange tubes are not visible in the flower illustrations, but are very likely hidden in the flowers. Let's look at the next flower, which again differs little from the previous one. The photo is not very high quality, but it is important to see well. Again, the center with the tube, which is stepped. We are looking at the center of the flower. This exactly corresponds to the illustrations in Vojnich's manuscript. The center is lined with smaller flowers that represent energy orbs. In the outer circle stand female figures who again have rings in their ears. The next flower is different. He is not seated in a circle, but in a square. Let's look at the detail. We can see the center with the tube again, but there is a strange element around the tube. It looks like the flower is bound by someone. The center is lined with geometric shapes that resemble a wall or building when viewed from above. The four corners of the square are highlighted. It seems that this time it is not a flower from Vojnich's manuscript, but a symbol of the earth. Why do I think so? Because according to the Bible, the earth is a mountain, or a hill set in a square basin. Besides, Atlantis was an artificially constructed world and its continents formed a flower. Tubus in this case may represent the island described by Plato, as the center around which lay the 5 circular continents. We will look at the map in Vojnich's manuscript, which, however, is not a map in the true sense of the word. We have already noticed a castle in one of the flowers. I don't know if this was the intention of the author and if it is a castle. A castle tower can also be a flower tube. We've seen more of them here. This scheme very likely refers to the path of the orbs through individual flowers. I borrowed the next image from a database of commercial photos. Watermarks will not hinder us, because the rest is clearly visible. We are looking at exactly the same situation as in the previous photos. A stepped tube and a light installed on it. But the light is not there by chance. It is the same symbol as the flowers with lights at the entrance to St. Peter's tomb in the Vatican. The center with the tubusan is again lined with female figures with distinctive rings in their ears as bearers of life. On the outer circle is another row of women playing musical instruments, which may be a symbol for sound frequencies. These women are sitting on tubes again. Also note the texture between the women. It can again be a form of a cone pattern. Let's go to the next slide. This dome with a tube in the middle is done in colors. More precisely, women appear here in colors. In detail, the photo is not of very good quality. But we can again see smaller flowers like energy orbs around the tube. The center is flanked by female figures wearing rings in their ears and playing musical instruments. And all these women in turn are standing on tubes of flowers. Notice the large number of characters among the tubes. It is people who come as energy from these tubes. Here is a beautifully crafted detail of a flower that is flanked by other smaller flowers. It's like they're seeds, right? Another photo from a commercial server shows a beautifully lit flower. The center is more like a lace in which other flowers are woven. In the next outer row we also see these flowers, but I would say that they look more like energy orbs. Furthermore, there are 2 rows of female figures, with the lowest women standing on the tubes again and dancing. This flower is also very special. The tube in the middle is massive and the flower seems almost closed. Note again that it is not set in a circle, but in an octagon, just like the little flowers we saw set on 8-pointed stars. I believe that in this case it is not a flower, but our Earth in a certain phase of transformation. Also notice the highlighted 4 corners, as if she turned around. Here is a slightly more modern take on the flower of life. I do not say the flower of life by chance, because these flowers, which very likely exist somewhere, are real flowers of life. In the center of the flower we see the tube again and the surroundings are made in the colors of the petals. The flower is perched on a background with stems that are strangely intertwined, resembling a labyrinth. This is also not a coincidence. And we will talk about the meaning of the labyrinth at the end of this video. I'm not sure, but based on the design and colors, this photo might be from a Thai temple, for example. And another example of a modern rendering of the flower of life, probably Art Nouveau. Flowers with tubes here fulfill the function of lighting. In this case, we are not looking at the orb symbol, but something else. In the center you see a human face with fangs like a beast, and around the face is a relief in the shape of sea waves. On the outer circle we see human figures. Let's take a closer look. The center really looks like a human head with big teeth. It is our sun as a spiritual being in the form of a lion. The waves around represent the sun's rays. The figures sitting here are men themselves. It looks bad in some places, but on a few you can actually see male genitalia. This artifact confirms the illustration in the Vojnych manuscript, where on the one hand the feminine energy with the attribute of the moon comes from the earth. But the masculine energy has the attribute of the sun and also comes from the sun. I will show you what it looks like in real life in the next video that will follow soon. But how is it possible that feminine energy, i.e. lunar energy, comes from the earth? And do you remember the biblical woman with the moon under her feet? The moon is not in the sky. There is only an illusion. The real moon lies somewhere else. And here in the illustration you see our sun as a lion. Above his head is a tube from Vojnich's manuscript. In architecture and literature we find many different representations of energy particles such as this one. An orb like a human head that has wings around it. For example, some may have running feet. This one also has wings on its head and two snakes, which in Vojnich's manuscript run in the roots of flowers. But sometimes they have a swastika around the perimeter. It is an expression of the spin that this particle needs to move. You certainly know the swastikas from the Nazi era. But it wasn't just the swastika that was misused by dark forces. Masonic illustration. On the left you see the sun as the masculine attribute of fire, which represents Adam. On the right is the feminine attribute of the moon and water and represents the biblical Eve. The two energies that bring life to earth. At the center is the supreme creative power, God. The Sumerian civilization expressed the shape of the soul as a fish. You can see the head of a fish in the form of a headdress, which is called a mitre, on the head of both the bishop and the pope. This spirit fish moves among the flowers. I have always wondered why Orthodox churches are so colorful. As if someone took them from a candy store. This is even more true in the case of the Moscow Kremlin. I thought that such an extravagance of colors is almost unworthy of a church building and also that the architecture is more like a fairground attraction. But this seems to have been the intention. And this building style has deep symbolism. So let's look at the details of the decoration of the Moscow Kremlin. First, notice those towers and tower roofs. The main tower has a conical shape and represents one of the tubes. It is topped with a flask and at the top we see a ball, which is the energy orb that holds the cross. Tower flasks are very colorful with strange patterns. Some have the actual shape and pattern of a cone. Each tower has a ball on top that bears a cross. And also note that red, white and green colors predominate exactly as in the illustrations of Vojnich's manuscript. Some look more like ice cream. But we cannot know what these shapes actually look like. In the manuscript, we do not find these flasks so colorfully depicted. But they are still there, and we will look at them in a moment. For comparison, let's look again at the illustrations in the manuscript. On the tips of the tubes we can see something that resembles the flasks on the towers of the temple. We are looking at another Orthodox church, not as colorful as the Kremlin, but the architecture is the same. Again we are looking at tubes with terrace steps. The church is made in white, green and gold. At the top we again see spheres that carry crosses. The balls again represent the energetic female orbs that carry the cross of life. We will look again in Vojnich's manuscript at the woman holding the cross and at others. As we explained, these orbs travel through roots, leaves, and entire flowers and pick up some kind of energy. We will explain what they take in the following parts. Some women hold a circle, all hold a star as starfire energy. What can starfire be? I believe that it is the aurora borealis, that is, the light that comes to these flowers. We will also discuss this later. Let's go further. Here we see another example of Orthodox architecture in white, green and red. You will notice these building blocks that resemble a cone pattern. On each temple flask we see a ball bearing a cross. You can compare these architectural shapes with the illustrations in Vojnich's manuscript. In this particular illustration we see temple flasks with a ball on top. The flowers at the entrance to St. Peter's tomb in the Vatican also have the same symbol. The top of the flowers is semicircular. But instead of a ball we see light here as a symbol of eternal light or fire. It is another symbol for eternal light. Also note the roses that flank the flower symbol. We have also seen the same decorative element in the rosettes of Hindu temples. A tube protrudes from the center of the flower, from which energy balls emerge. Let's look at those temple flasks in Vojnich's manuscript. We have already seen them here on this map, which is not a map in the true sense of the word. It is very likely a diagram of energy orb paths between flowers. Note the tubes shown between the circular charts. And here they are. You see the form of temple towers with spheres on top. Below is a cone pattern. This is actually all Orthodox architecture, but not only Orthodox. You can also find them in other architecture and old illustrations, although they always have a slightly different form. Let's look at a few more examples of Orthodox architecture. This church is white, blue and gold in color. You will not find colorful church buildings in Christianity. The interior is even more colorful. Exceptions are Buddhist and Indian temples. Again, we are looking at the element representing the cone pattern. The gables again carry spheres and crosses. This church has the same colors that I saw on the tubes in Vojnich's manuscript, i.e. white, green and red. Again, there is a cone pattern, a hint of a tube, and a ball at the top that holds the cross, that is, an energy orb that circles the cross as the cross of life, or an energy charge. We can see the same thing on the main tower. The towers of this church are more colorful, as you can see, 1 blue and 3 green. If you ever notice in the close-up photos of these spheres, some are colorless. Others have a different spectrum of colors. We have already seen this backward altar or statue. Notice the blue ball that comes out of the flower. Below are depicted women as bearers of life. We will briefly stop at Islamic architecture, where the situation is exactly the same. We are looking at one of the Islamic mosques, which is shaped like a tube with a sphere sitting on top. However, this ball does not hold a cross, but a circle and in some cases a crescent moon. Note the balconies that represent the tube steps in Vojnich's manuscript. Let's compare it again with the illustration in the manuscript. These are tubes. Their symbol is temple towers. You can see they are graded. And here is a beautiful example of towers and flasks on top of them. An interesting fact is that the mosques are mostly white, but their interior is colorful. In the background you see domes with tubes on top that hold the crescent moon. Who does not know the Taj Mahal? This beautiful building also hides a secret. 4 towers like flower tubes. Each has several steps around its perimeter that serve as walkways for the muezzin. At the top is a dome and a tubus with balls. On the main building, you can see the petals laid down, and a tube with balls protrudes from their center. At the very top is a crescent moon and an arrow pointing to the sky. And finally we show Hagia Sophia, and the situation is exactly the same as in the Taj Mahal. Again, towers with cones on top, tubes that carry balls. This is just a nice illustration, but the crescent's moons are nicely displayed. As we have already explained, the moon is a feminine attribute and it may seem like a paradox to you. Some Muslim countries consider women as an inferior being, or even as a commodity. A woman has no rights here, but on the other hand, these temples are actually dedicated to female fertility. Is not it strange? Thus, as the moon and water are feminine attributes, the sun and fire are masculine attributes. The next short video, which will follow very soon, will tell us about this phenomenon in photographs. But now, as I promised, we will look at labyrinths, and that will end today's presentation. We begin with a fresco of Sumerian gods pouring something from cones into the flowers of the earth. This is the actual shape of the earth, i.e. the biblical mountain, which is represented here as a labyrinth with flowers. Above the earth we see the winged sun as a spiritual being. However, we do not see these flowers, and they seem to be part of the underground world. I believe that the light we call the aurora borealis flows from the cones of the gods on earth. I am aware of the fact that some of you think I am a fool, but I will continue anyway. By the way, Nostradamus mentions flowers on Mars in his visions. Are there flowers on Mars? And what is Mars anyway? We are looking at the head of the column, which has the shape of flowers in a labyrinth. Once upon a time, people believed that our Earth is shaped like a turtle, which carries the world on its shell. The carapace represents a hill or mountain, and the four limbs represent the four corners of the Earth, in other words, a circle within a square. The world is depicted here as a labyrinth. This is a fragment from a Hindu temple. This is again the flower of the labyrinth. I believe that the labyrinth is the paths through which energy particles move, i.e. orbs. This very old fresco shows a haloed man in a labyrinth. This is a symbol for the light human body, which is not material in origin, but is a human being born of light. And one more example of a labyrinth in a Hindu temple. If we look at the detail, we will see energy orbs alternating with stars in this labyrinth. Greek or Roman mosaic tiles with a labyrinth motif and a flower in the center. This labyrinth does not have a flower in the middle, but a ball. The labyrinth motif is lined with angel wings. Here is another labyrinth. In the middle is not a flower or a ball, but the biblical serpent dragon. The dragon held our sun in his mouth, but he no longer holds it for 7 years. Animations and videos on Soho are fake. That is also why there is chaos in the world, because the serpent Satan represents the dark side of our life. The labyrinth in this illustration is a symbol of the earth. Notice that she is seated in the water. Again we have the symbol of a circle in a square pool. We have also seen the snake in the illustrations, and this creature seems to be harming the flowers. Looking at this image, some of you will think of the Greek myth of the Minotaur in the maze. But these fables, like others, are only allegories. The creature in the center has a bull's head, and the bull was considered a symbol of life force long ago and was also worshipped. The bull also has a human body with a cat head. The cat, that is, the beast, is the spiritual expression of the human spirit, and you know this connection well in the form of the Sphinx. Yes, this too is a symbol for the energy ball, energy as bull power. Human body and animal as spiritual being. In this picture there is a labyrinth in the form of a garden where people walk. Gardens of this type were most often created during the times of the French kings. And their appearance is not accidental. In the middle of this garden is a garden stand like a tube with a conical roof. The tree on top of it has ball-shaped roots and is actually the tree of life. This tree of life represents the energy or spark of life that we pass on to our children and generations to come. A family diagram resembles the branches of a tree. I will talk about the transmission of this divine spark sometime next time, because we must first know our body perfectly. This rose in the labyrinth was very likely part of Greek architecture. Here we see Mother Earth nursing her human child, an angelic being. There are also animals. A goat that and a she-wolf that nurse other human beings. Perhaps you remember the biblical wolves in sheep's clothing, i.e. human beings but with a non-human soul. Today, these entities manifest almost everywhere. Only from Earth are angelic beings born. And there are many emblems and logos of organizations that have the shape of a winged Earth. Baphomet is feared by every man, but this fear comes from ignorance of what Baphomet represents. It is an expression of the way human beings come into this world and their departure after the death of the body. Below we see a man with the attributes of the sun and fire on the left and a woman with the attributes of water and the moon on the left. The union of these two energies creates a new human being. Baphomet is a female figure with the head of a goat who carries eternal fire, the eternal life energy, on her head. You can still see the symbol on his stomach today, for example. In the healthcare industry, a green and a red snake strive for a human egg. In other illustrations, Baphomet has inscriptions on his arms. On the left one that points down is written coagula and it means glue. It means that we are bound here by energy force to the earth. On his right arm is written solve and that means freedom. That is, the human spirit, which has complete freedom. So let's sum it up. Women are born through energy orbs that come from flowers from within the earth. From the flowers we saw in Vojnich's manuscript. Men, on the other hand, come in the form of energy parts along with the rays of the sun, from the sun that was held in its mouth by the serpent, as we will see in the next extra video. Edgar Cayce once stated that the soul is genderless. So why does this division exist? And where was the beginning of everything? The creation of Adam and Eve is interpreted as the creation of Adam by God and the creation of Eve from Adam's rib. But think about it. A woman by herself can only have daughters. However, it depends on the man whether a girl or a boy is born. Until the 12th week of pregnancy, it is still a female fetus. After the 12th week, the female reproductive organs descend outside the body. The vagina turns into a penis, the ovaries turn into testicles, and the prostate is actually the rest of the uterus. So was Eve created from Adam's rib? And what is Adam's rib? That was an academic question in the sense of what came first. The chicken or the egg? In my opinion, there must have been the first hen to lay that egg. Adam and Eve were created as immortal and luminous beings, and only the biblical serpent imprisoned them in the material carrier that is our body. And I am convinced that life in matter cannot exist in space and that this form of life is only the privilege of our Earth. My opinion on the different types of mummies, including those found in Peru, is that they are different developmental stages in the development of the human material body. In the next installment of the Vojnych manuscript series, we will focus on the human body, especially on the genitals and the way we come to this reality. We will show this process especially on the Egyptian frescoes, because Egypt was not the empire of the pharaohs, but it is a biblical library about the beginning and the end of one human civilization. I bid you farewell for now and have a nice day.